What if the deepest political betrayal wasn't played out on stage but in silence between two men who once trusted each other to rebuild America? When Musk called Vance a puppet, the world erupted. But what came next? A secret meeting, a broken video, and one line that might just change everything. This isn't just politics, this is about friendship, power, and the cost of staying quiet too long. If that hit you deeper than any headline, don't scroll away. Tap subscribe to follow the full story, because this moment isn't over. Hit like if silence ever spoke louder than words, and tell us in the comments, did Vance do the right thing? Share this video with someone who still believes dignity matters. Let's bring back conversations that listen, not just shout. It began with silence. Inside the West Wing, the final draft of the Digital Sovereignty Act sat ready for signature, a bill backed by President Trump and shaped line by Vice President JD Vance. Its premise was simple: require all tech companies operating in the United States to store American citizens' data on servers physically located within U.S. borders. No backdoors, no foreign jurisdictions. It was bold, nationalistic, and unapologetically American. But one seat at the drafting table had gone cold. Elon Musk, once a loud supporter of digital reform and a prominent member of the White House's Technology Reform Council, had grown quiet. He missed the last two meetings. No public statements, no private ones either. Just quiet until JD Vance sent a direct email. A simple request to attend the final strategy session scheduled for Friday at 9:00 a.m. The email was opened, marked read, but never answered. Vance noticed. Of course he noticed. He'd written the bill with Musk's early feedback in mind. He remembered the late-night calls, the ambitious vision talks, the shared frustration with foreign data leaks. But now, silence. Not even a got it. He didn't alert the president. He didn't raise it with the staff. Instead, Vance did something few in power still do. He reached out as a friend. If you have concerns, just talk to me. Don't let silence become the message. That was all he wrote, one line privately sent to Elon's direct inbox. That was 2 days ago. Now Vance stood in the hallway outside the Roosevelt Room, phone in hand, screen glowing. The message still showed delivered, not seen, but that didn't matter. The last email had been seen and ignored, and that was louder than 1,000 words. He exhaled, slowly slid the phone into his pocket, and walked toward the press briefing area. Behind the door, preparations were underway to present the bill to the public. Dozens of reporters, hundreds of millions in funding, an entire administration poised to declare digital independence. And still no Musk. Something in JD's gut twisted, not out of fear but out of disappointment, because this wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about a man who once promised to build the future of freedom alongside him, now ghosting the very moment they were about to deliver. Vance didn't show it, not yet. The cameras would be rolling soon. But inside, the first crack had formed, and history, as always, would start not with a bang, but with something quieter: an email ignored. It came at 2:03 a.m., like a thunderclap in the middle of the night, not loud but sharp. Just one sentence, one tweet, but the kind that splits friendships wide open. JD Vance convinced me to back the bill. Now he's just a tool. Posted from Elon Musk's official account on X, the message spread like a match dropped on dry brush. Within minutes, it was screenshotted, analyzed, reshared, reposted. By dawn, Happy Vance, the tool, was trending across all 50 states. Cable news networks scrambled, headline crawlers flashed Musk turns on Vance. Talk shows lit up, podcasts dropped emergency episodes. Tool became the word of the day, repeated in every diner, office, and gas station TV. But inside the White House, things were anything but reactive. JD Vance said nothing, not a word. He was already awake when the tweet went live. Not because of insomnia, but because he'd never truly fallen asleep. He'd been up late rereading the security addendum to the Digital Sovereignty Act, the very part Musk had helped draft months earlier. He saw the alert on his screen. He read it once, then again, and then nothing. No slamming of the desk, no pacing, just a long, still breath. Down the hall, Trump was not so calm. By 7:15 a.m., the president was storming through the West Wing, his voice echoing like boots on a steel deck. "This is a declaration of war," he snapped. "He's calling us liars and calling you weak." Vance didn't flinch. "He's angry, Mr. President. Not dangerous, not yet." But Trump wasn't buying restraint. He wanted a full-throated rebuttal, a press conference, a sharp line drawn in public, and he wanted it now. "You're not going to let him lead the conversation. Not on my bill, not on your name." But Vance just stared at the screen, the tweet still glowing. He wasn't worried about headlines, he was worried about what they meant. Because Elon hadn't said the bill is flawed or the administration misled me. No, he'd made it personal. Now he's just a tool. That wasn't policy critique, that was betrayal. And worse, it was public designed to humiliate. Not just Vance as vice president, but Vance as a man. The networks were quick to jump on the framing. Fox asked, "Is JD Vance still his own man?" MSNBC shouted. "Musk exposes the puppet Veep," CNN posted, "vice president or political accessory." What hurt more than the words was how fast they spread. Musk hadn't offered a phone call, a private complaint, or even a warning. He'd chosen X, the loudest arena on Earth, to throw a punch, and the nation was watching to see if Vance would hit back. But he didn't, and that silence became the second headline. Reporters cornered press aides. Why hasn't he responded? Is he guilty? Is he scared? Trump didn't hide his frustration. He called an emergency strategy meeting that afternoon and looked Vance square in the eye. "If you don't speak soon, you'll look guilty. People will think it's true." But Vance, calm as a stone, replied softly, "And if I shout back, I'll make it worse. I won't give him fire to feed on." He wasn't dodging responsibility. He was refusing to let the moment spiral into a circus. He understood something deeper than spin cycles, he knew. That if you answered an insult with another insult, the truth would get drowned out by the noise. But outside those West Wing walls, noise was already king. Clips from Musk's tweet appeared on The View. It became a punchline on late night, and for the first time since his vice presidency began, JD Vance was being ridiculed, not respected. "He's being played like a fiddle," one radio host mocked. "Musk just turned the Veep into a meme," a TikTok teen quipped. And yet, through it all, Vance said nothing. He didn't defend. He didn't deny. He watched. He waited. Because deep down he knew this wasn't about internet reputation. It was about what would happen next. If Elon tweeted again, if this turned from insult to campaign, if trust broke further, then the rift wouldn't just split the administration. It would split the country. And so the silence of JD Vance became its own kind of message. Not weakness, not fear, but warning. Because while others rushed to trend, he stood still, watching the ground shift beneath his feet, knowing full well that the next step might shake the entire nation. And Elon, he'd just fired the first shot. By the time the West Wing emptied out and the last camera shut off for the day, JD Vance was already driving home. The city outside was dark quiet, but his thoughts were loud. It was 3:00 a.m. when he unlocked the front door. He didn't turn on the lights, just walked straight to his study, loosened his tie, and sat in the same old leather chair where so many speeches had begun. But tonight wasn't for politics. Tonight wasn't for press. Tonight was personal. He opened his laptop and clicked through a few folders. Buried in one labeled Digital Reform Archives was a clip he hadn't watched in months. It was grainy, recorded late at night on a private Zoom call. Elon Musk had been speaking to members of the Early Technology Reform Council. Half the faces were silent. But Musk, he was on fire. You want to know why I'm still here? It's not the title, it's not Trump, it's JD. He's the only one in this administration I actually trust. The words hung there, honest, raw, said without a script, and without a... Vance paused the video, leaned back, let the silence sink in, and then he pressed record. No lighting setup, no prepared notes, just him, tired shirt, slightly wrinkled voice, low and steady. Elon. He began, then stopped. He looked away for a moment, then returned to the lens. Elon, I haven't changed. You just stopped asking. He let the camera roll a few more seconds, then hit stop. He sat motionless. His finger hovered over the upload button, but he didn't click. Not tonight. Instead, he saved the video, labeled it simply unsent. His eyes shifted to a photo frame on the far side of the desk. 3 men sitting at a long wooden table near the ocean, Musk in a navy sports coat, Trump in golf whites, Vance in a casual dress shirt, sleeves rolled up. The sun setting behind them, laughter frozen in the frame. That dinner had been 2 years ago, a weekend summit in South Florida. It wasn't official, no media, just steak, scotch, and bold ideas. Vance reached out and picked up the frame, stared at it for a few long seconds. Then he turned it face down. There was no rage, no outburst, just grief. The kind you only feel when the person hurting you is someone who once called you brother. The attack on X had made headlines, but this was what stung. Not the trending hashtags, not the late-night jokes. It was the memory of a man who once said, "We're building something together now," turning his back without so much as a call. Vance didn't feel betrayed by a billionaire. He felt abandoned by a friend. That's what no headline could capture. No press release could fix. Earlier that day, a White House aide had asked him, "Do you want us to prep a response for the Musk tweet?" JD had only shaken his head. He didn't reach out when it mattered. Why should I perform now? This wasn't about optics. This was about trust ruptured not by enemies but by silence. And perhaps that was what made it worse. Musk had every chance to speak to him in private. Every reason to ask what happened to the bill we started together, but instead he chose the most public path and aimed his arrow directly at JD's name. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was emotional sabotage, and Vance knew it. Still, he didn't fight fire with fire. He wrote nothing on X. He said nothing to reporters. Because sometimes the deepest wounds aren't from what's said, but from what isn't. And tonight that silence filled every corner of the room. He shut the laptop, rubbed his eyes, reached for the old notebook where he usually drafted speeches. But he didn't write a speech. He just wrote one line. Don't answer hurt with anger. Answer it with memory. Then he closed the notebook, stood up, and walked to the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, distant, uncaring. He didn't know what Musk would do next. Maybe another tweet, maybe leaked messages, maybe silence. But whatever came, JD Vance knew this. His response wouldn't come from a microphone. It would come from a place deeper than politics, from the quiet place where broken friendships still echo. The silence that JD Vance had chosen wasn't empty. It was echoing. By the next morning, the backlash had taken on a life of its own. What began as a single tweet from Elon Musk had exploded into a national referendum on JD Vance's character, loyalty, and leadership, and the country wasn't whispering. It was shouting. Talk shows tore into him. News anchors raised their eyebrows and lowered their voices. YouTubers uploaded hour-long breakdowns under thumbnails that screamed things like JD Vance, the mask behind the machine, betrayal, or blind loyalty, the silence of the tool. One creator, a popular tech influencer with 6 million followers, posted a video titled, JD Vance is the human face of digital tyranny. He leaned into the camera, smirking. You think he's quiet out of humility? That's not virtue, that's a strategy. JD Vance is the humanized version of government control. He's the mask of compliance. The video hit 2.3 million views in less than 5 hours. Cable news joined the frenzy. MSNBC's primetime panel questioned whether Vance had lost the confidence of Silicon Valley. Fox News called him deliberate to a fault. CNN ran a 3-hour special titled Vance, the Vice President Who Won't Speak. And still he didn't answer. Inside the White House, pressure mounted like a pot about to boil over. President Trump was livid. You're making us look weak. He punched, and you're still sitting there bleeding, he snapped at Vance in the Roosevelt room. But JD stood calm, hands folded. He had no rebuttal, only a short nod and a quiet request, give me until the end of the day. If I say anything, it has to mean something. By early evening, the decision had been made for him. The White House communications team, under pressure from donors and allies, scheduled a brief press appearance at 6:30 p.m. Cameras were set up, lighting adjusted. The press room filled to capacity. Aides handed Vance a stack of note cards. Talking points, facts, poll numbers, damage control. He looked at the stack for a long moment. Then he left it on the table. As he stepped behind the podium, a hush fell across the room. Phones were raised, live streams launched. The entire country seemed to pause, not in respect, but in curiosity. Would he finally strike back? Would he call Musk out? Would he defend himself? Instead, he looked out at the crowd, then straight into the camera lens and spoke just 12 words. I don't have a speech tonight. I only have sorrow. And then he walked off. No Q&A, no message war, no dramatic soundbite. The room erupted in confusion. Reporters shouted after him. Anchors struggled to interpret. Was that it? Was that the statement? What does he mean? The clip went viral in under 30 minutes. In just 8 hours, it had surpassed 20 million views across platforms. The hashtag #VanceDidn'tFight dominated X. But surprisingly, the reaction wasn't purely hostile, as some mocked him. Of course they did. But others paused, replayed the clip, watched it again, not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. A retired Navy vet from Georgia posted, "He looked like a man who just got stabbed by someone he used to toast bourbon with. That wasn't politics. That was pain." A middle school teacher in Iowa tweeted, "I've seen that face. It's the same one my husband wore the day he lost his best friend." A former campaign volunteer wrote, "This isn't about data laws. It's about being hurt publicly and refusing to become bitter privately." Suddenly, a counter-movement began to form. Not loud, not organized, just people. Feeling something they didn't expect to feel: compassion. Not because JD Vance had fought back, but because he hadn't. Because instead of spinning, shouting, or blaming, he spoke like a human being, not a politician. He didn't posture. He didn't retaliate. He mourned. And in today's world, that was almost revolutionary. Meanwhile, Elon Musk hadn't posted again. Nothing. Not a follow-up, not a clarification, not a walkback. The silence on both ends now weighed heavier than any exchange of words. Inside the White House, aides were divided. Some urged Vance to clarify his remarks, to draft a longer response, to retake the narrative. Others, especially the younger staffers, weren't so sure. One said quietly, "Maybe the story is that he didn't hit back." Late that night, Vance sat alone on his back porch. No tie, no jacket, just the night breeze and the weight of the day. He scrolled through the comments on the viral clip. Some were cruel, others dismissive, but buried in between were messages that stopped him cold. You didn't fight, Mr. Vance, but you didn't fold either. Sometimes leadership means absorbing the blow without swinging back. That's what my father would have done. God bless you. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. He didn't need to win the internet. He just needed to remind the country that not every blow demands a counterpunch. Some wounds, he knew, don't need noise, they need time. And sometimes, silence isn't surrender. It's strength in its rawest form. The country was still reeling from 12 quiet words. I don't have a speech tonight. I only have sorrow. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't concession, it was something else. And no one quite knew what to do with it. Cable pundits argued for hours. He's hiding. He's crumbling. He's pulling a Lincoln. One analyst on MSNBC compared Vance to a ghost in a machine wandering the halls of power, but refusing to speak the language of politics. And then the silence deepened. No new tweet from Elon Musk. No further comment from the White House. Just a nation suspended between two powerful men who had once shared vision and laughter and now shared only silence. But behind closed doors, something stirred. At 11:42 p.m. the next night, JD Vance received an encrypted email from a familiar contact. Not from Elon Musk directly, but from his longtime aide, a woman known inside tech circles for operating far beneath the radar. The message was simple, blunt, and chilling in its honesty. No press, no statements. Just the two of you. The old SpaceX hangar, if you still care. There were no attachments, no location pins, just coordinates, a time, and a request that could either mend a national wound or rip it open wider. Vance stared at the screen. No one would know if he refused. No one would blame him if he deleted it. But he didn't. He closed the laptop without a word, slipped on a jacket, and walked past his security detail without alerting them. No aides, no briefing, no word to the president. He didn't want clearance. He wanted clarity. 2 hours later, just outside Boca Chica, Texas, the coast wind cutting sharp and the stars hanging low over the Gulf, a single black SUV pulled up to a dimly lit warehouse. The last remnants of the original SpaceX test complex, now decommissioned, quiet as a church. JD stepped out and looked up. The lettering on the metal hangar door had faded, but the logo was still barely visible, the old ambition, the rocket that once symbolized leaving limits behind. And now here they were limited. The side door creaked open, and Elon Musk stood there. No security, no entourage. Just jeans, a gray hoodie, and an expression that was neither angry nor apologetic, just tired. They didn't shake hands. They didn't sit right away. For a full minute, they just stood there, silent, like two men staring across a battlefield neither wanted to fight on. Musk spoke first. "I didn't betray you, JD." The words were low, measured, not defiant, defensive. "I just couldn't watch innovation get shackled. That bill, it's not protection, it's a leash." Vance nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the floor, then raised his gaze. "You think I want to control people? You think this bill is about power, Elon? I don't want technology to serve the state. I want it to serve something bigger: decency, integrity." Musk frowned. But who decides what's decent, what's ethical? That's the problem. Vance stepped closer. "You know what's ethical: not blindsiding the country with a midnight tweet, not calling your friends tools in front of millions of people. That used to matter to you." Musk didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. Instead, he ran his hand through his hair and looked away. "I thought you were turning into the machine, JD." Vance let out a slow breath. And I thought you were the future. Turns out we were both wrong about something. For a long while, neither man said a word. No staff, no cameras, just two voices that had once shaped American policy in sync, now struggling to find a note that wasn't dissonant. Finally, Musk extended a hand, not for a shake, but to point toward a bench near the far end of the hangar. They walked over and sat. The air smelled like rust and dust, not glory, not progress, just memory. I miss when we dreamed instead of tweeted, Vance said quietly. Musk stared into the dark. I miss when we trusted each other. The moment didn't end with an agreement. There were no papers signed, no pictures taken, no proclamations made. But as the two men stood to leave, they exchanged a slow, small nod. The kind only two people can share when they've said all they can and forgiven what can be forgiven. For now. Back in Washington, no one knew the meeting had taken place. Trump wasn't informed, the press had no leaks, even Vance's closest aides thought he was sleeping in. But something had shifted, not in headlines, not in approval polls, but in the quiet space between two titans who had nearly destroyed each other and realized just in time that something between them was still worth saving. They didn't fix everything, but they didn't let everything break either. And in today's America, maybe that was more than enough. The meeting in the abandoned SpaceX hangar had ended with no handshake, no official truce, no public statement. Just a small, wordless nod between two men who had once imagined they could rebuild America together. But while JD Vance and Elon Musk sat in silence somewhere far beyond the hangar walls, the American people began to speak. Not in Washington, not in think tanks, but in kitchens, coffee shops, classrooms, and front porches, where real life still moved forward even as the country's political elite froze in confusion. It started small. A fifth-grade teacher in Montana live-streaming her Sunday lesson prep from a wooden dining table paused to speak directly to the camera. Her voice was quiet, not rehearsed, just real. I don't care who's right anymore, she said plainly. I care about who still listens when they're hurt. She didn't mention Vance or Musk by name, but everyone knew. Then came a boy, 13 years old, from somewhere in central Ohio. His clip was barely 10 seconds long, no music, no filter. Just him holding a phone with trembling hands. My dad told me, Vance might be silent, but his eyes look like they're crying. That line caught fire. It was raw, honest, and it broke through where punditry had failed. By nightfall, it was everywhere, on cable news tickers, on church bulletin boards, and especially on X, where a new pair of hashtags surged up the trending list. Vance listens, not just policy. They weren't created by campaign teams or bot farms. They weren't about elections or legislation. They were born from emotion, real American emotion. Across the country, thousands of people began posting their own thoughts, not screaming, not debating, but quietly observing what had been overlooked in the media frenzy. In rural Tennessee, a retired veteran posted a selfie with his hand over his heart and wrote, I've seen that look before. It's what we wore when we lost a brother in silence. That man's carrying weight, and I respect it. In a Seattle bookstore, a woman snapped a photo of her book club paused mid-discussion, watching Vance's sorrow speech on someone's phone. The caption read, No one blinked, not once. It's been a long time since a politician made us stop reading. And then there was the photo, shot by an unknown staffer and posted without caption. It showed JD Vance, standing alone by a window in the East Wing. His back, slightly curved shoulders, tired. In his hand, a half-folded binder. Behind him, a desk filled with untouched briefing notes. But it wasn't the pose that moved people. It was the expression. His head was lowered not in defeat but in deep reflection. like a man who'd spent too long holding things in, like someone who wanted to scream but wouldn't, because he knew the country didn't need more noise. That image spread like gospel. Millions shared it with no added words, just the hashtags Vance listens, not just policy. And suddenly something rare happened. The narrative began to shift, not by force, not by spin, but organically. It wasn't about who was right. It was about what felt real. Americans weren't siding with Vance because of political allegiance. They weren't praising him for any policy win. They were responding to something older than strategy, something deeper than partisanship. They saw a man hurt and still standing. They saw restraint in the age of reaction. And maybe most importantly, they saw a little bit of themselves in his silence. In a suburban diner outside Pittsburgh, a waitress refilled coffee cups while the TV over the counter replayed clips of the Musk-Vance feud. A regular customer leaned over and said, "You know what I think? He's not quiet because he's weak. He's quiet because he's tired of the shouting." The waitress nodded. "Aren't we all in South Dakota?" A farmer live-streamed from his tractor, wind rustling behind him. His words were simple. "First time I ever believed a politician wasn't playing a part. Maybe we need more of that." In these quiet corners of America, the public didn't need full explanations or policy breakdowns. They just needed someone to stop yelling long enough for them to breathe. JD Vance, whether intentionally or not, had become that breath. Meanwhile, the White House tried to assess what was happening. Vance's approval numbers didn't soar, but his trust numbers quietly climbed. In battleground districts, local leaders noted an unusual trend. People weren't asking if Vance was winning the fight, they were asking if he was still okay. It was a shift, small, subtle, but seismic. Because in a political culture built on dominance and spectacle, America had just remembered the power of dignity. No statement from Trump. No new tweet from Musk. No updates from Vance. And somehow that silence had become louder than all the shouting before it. Back in his office, JD Vance watched it all unfold on his screen. He read the comments, the hashtags, the handwritten letters now arriving in piles. Some made him smile. Some made him ache. But one stuck with him most. It was typed in shaky handwriting from a 74-year-old widow in Kansas. "You remind me of my husband. He never talked much, but when he hurt, the whole room could feel it. Thank you for reminding me that stillness is still strength." Vance folded the letter gently, slid it into his drawer, looked out the window. Two men had nearly torn each other apart in public, but somehow in that wreckage the people had built a bridge quietly, carefully, and without permission. And he knew now this wasn't about saving a friendship. It was about reminding a nation that listening still matters. It was nearly midnight when JD Vance stepped back through the west entrance of the White House. No cameras, no press. Just the same quiet corridors he'd walked 1,000 times before, but tonight, everything felt heavier. The meeting with Elon Musk in that forgotten SpaceX hangar wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't closure. But it also wasn't nothing. Somewhere between the hard words and the long pauses, a thread had been pulled taut, not broken, just strained. As he passed the portrait-lined walls of the West Wing, Vance didn't pause. He didn't speak. He went straight to his office. But the silence didn't follow him long. President Trump was already there, seated at the edge of the desk, arms crossed, eyes sharp but tired. So he asked without preamble, "Did you get through to him?" Vance didn't sit. He just leaned on the window frame, still wearing the same jacket from the trip to Texas. "No," he said softly. "But I think neither of us is ready to walk away." Trump didn't reply right away. He just studied Vance's face, the lines etched deeper after these past few days, the calm that now carried the weight of something unspoken. Finally, the president nodded once. "That's better than nothing." And with that, Trump stood, gave a rare pat to Vance's shoulder, and walked out. Vance stood there alone, staring at the empty chair across from his desk, the one Elon had once occupied during early briefings, the one where they'd once dreamed up reforms no one thought possible. Back then, they weren't just building policy, they were building trust. Now that trust was wounded. But not dead. His phone buzzed. The screen lit up. Just one notification. Elon Musk, at Elon Musk 1H. He's still the only one I want to talk to. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just 12 words enough to stir the internet into another frenzy. Within minutes, screenshots of the post spread like sparks in dry grass. Headlines flashed, Musk signals softening, the only one Elon reaches toward Vance again. 12 words that might save the administration. But inside that West Wing office, there was no celebration. Vance didn't smile, he didn't reply. He just stared at the screen, not reading the words, but feeling them. They were unexpected, not performative, not strategic, and somehow more honest than anything Musk had said in weeks. He set the phone down, opened his laptop, and clicked into a forgotten folder. Personal, not for release. There it was, the video, the one he'd recorded in the earliest hours after Musk's first public attack, back when the pain was still fresh and the friendship still felt salvageable. He watched it again. Elon, he said in the video. His voice, quiet eyes, steady, I haven't changed. You just stopped asking. It wasn't a campaign message. It wasn't rehearsed. It was just a man, tired, honest, hurt, trying to hold on to something before it slipped away. He hovered his finger over the upload button. He had hesitated that night. He'd saved it not out of fear, but out of decency. Because he knew timing mattered. Words could heal or they could wound further. But tonight felt different. This wasn't about fighting anymore. Not with Musk, not with the press, not even with public perception. This was about letting truth breathe before it suffocated under silence. He clicked upload. Within minutes, the video was live. No background music, no banners, no hashtags. Just JD Vance alone at 3:00 a.m., speaking the words he never planned to share. Words that were now finally ready to be heard. The internet reacted instantly. Some mocked it, some dissected it, but many, perhaps most, felt it. A mother in Indiana posted, "This isn't politics. It's the kind of hurt you feel when your best friend leaves the room and doesn't look back." A firefighter in Nevada wrote, "Man stood tall even when cut deep." That's leadership, that's grace, and a grandmother from North Carolina simply commented, "I trust this man, not because he shouted, but because he didn't." Within an hour, views climbed past 5 million. By dawn, they'd passed 15. Hashtags like hashtag he still believes and Vance's us started trending. But none of that mattered to JD Vance, not really, because this wasn't about going viral. This wasn't about public favor, it was about preserving something deeper than approval hope. He looked out the window as the first rays of morning cut through the clouds hanging over the Capitol. He could feel the weight in the country easing, not disappearing, but shifting, because when the shouting finally stopped, something else had space to rise. Understanding, forgiveness, humility, and maybe, just maybe, a new beginning. In another office somewhere across the country, Elon Musk watched the video alone. He didn't repost it. He didn't comment. But his aide would later say that when it ended, he sat back in his chair and whispered one word finally. And in that word, as in that upload, a sliver of trust flickered back to life. It wasn't a treaty, but it was a choice. And sometimes that's how healing begins, not with fanfare, but with the courage to speak and the grace to listen. In a world that never stops shouting, sometimes it's the quietest moments that carry the loudest truth. The story of JD Vance and Elon Musk isn't just about politics. It's about something deeper, the pain of broken trust, the courage it takes to listen when you've been hurt, and the grace to speak when silence feels safer. Many of us, especially those who've lived through decades of change, know that relationships don't fall apart in a single argument. They unravel in the moments we stop asking, stop explaining, and start assuming. This story reminds us reconciliation doesn't always start with an apology. Sometimes it starts with a message left unsent, or a video finally uploaded. As we get older, we realize that true strength isn't in how loud we speak, but in how deeply we're willing to feel. So ask yourself, who in your life needs to hear that you haven't given up? If this message resonated with you, leave a comment below. Who did you think of while watching this story? And don't forget to hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Sometimes the quietest voices change everything.